When you've got a pal, he's your friend for good. You look after each other like best friends should. There are times of laughter, times you've been away. He's pleased to see you when you're home to stay.
All dogs love marrowbone, so give your best friend Pal dog food. The marrowbone he loves, plus all the meaty goodness he really needs.
So give him Pal, 'cause he's your best friend.
Don't want fire crazies, I just don't need all that. I just want a bowl that's good and whole, and this is where it's at. You're so square, shredders, I don't care. I don't know why my spoon flips, I only know it does. I wonder why I love you, shredders. I guess it's just because you're so square. Shredders, I don't care.
It's the way they put the whole wheat, malt and vitamins together that makes Shredders squarer than the average breakfast.
Your energy-saving Philips Automatic and Persil Automatic. Together you wash a best blouse right, a tablecloth bright, a hard-working shirt white. Everything in your family wash, fresh and clean. Persil Automatic, approved by Philips and all these. So you, your automatic and Persil Automatic, together you wash everything right, clean and white.
Looks great, Jean. Some coffee?
Yes, please, over there.
Jean, you switched brands. That's not Nescafe.
Well, I saved some money, but...
But now you know that no other coffee has the richer, smoother Nescafe taste. Except Nescafe.
Right.
We'll use mine.
Nescafe.
Worth a little extra?
Definitely.
She's got the message.
Nescafe. Coffee at its best.
Bring it alive. Bring it alive. Bird's cream topping really brings it alive. It's creamy and white, delicious and light. Bird's cream topping really brings it alive.
Bird's Dream Topping brings 101 desserts to life.
As everyone knows, you can enjoy a cigar with a pint at any pub. But there's one particular sign to look out for. Inside every lion and castle, you'll find a smooth, mellow Castella cigar. So get them together. A pint and Castella.
To keep trying. Father's right, you know. How to destroy everything that is good in this country.
Dr. Goebbels is my superior. I have to do my work.
New Sure.
Let's do it. Do it again. Again. Again.
Work so hard to keep you dry.
And spin. Spin. Leap. Turn. Okay.
Its performance is outstanding. New Sure won't let you down.
With his familiar pint of Skol, Trevor looks like a normal scholar, but he is in fact a hyper-intelligent mega-being from a distant galaxy, which means he can score 180 at darts. With his eyes closed. Beat the Space Invaders at their own game.
Oh no, it's Trevor.
He can even transmit telepathic commands.
2 pints of Skol.
I am very great one.
Naturally, Skol can't turn you into a hyper-intelligent mega-being with superpowers. But when you know lager, you're a scholar.
Can you identify these stripes?
They're Esso striped protectors and are 2 of the 6 pictures you have to identify in the Great Esso Superloop competition. And the prizes? How about these 4 MG Metros for a start? And there are over 1,000 home protection and safety prizes. And even if you don't win, you can't lose, because you've got new Esso Superloop, the striped protector. There's no better oil.
Michael is trying new Colgate Blue Minty Gel.
Looks great. Let me try. Tastes cool. Let me try, Mum.
New Colgate Blue Minty Gel, a creamy blue gel packed with Colgate's advanced fluoride protection, proven in clinical tests, working towards the day when Colgate hope there'll be 0 fillings.
Michael, it's good for both of you.
Want some?
Now 2 Colgates, regular and new Blue Minty Gel. Nobody's working harder than Colgate for 0 fillings.
Listen to the fruit salad. Never stops talking.
Oh, be gentle with the topping. Don't try my flavour.
If only it could be Nestle Tip Top. It is
Tip Top! I'm not cream, but I certainly taste creamy. I'm lovely and light. I'd make anything taste creamier. Sauces, desserts, coffee. Whoop-soo. Aren't you looking slim, Mum?
With your help, Tip Top.
Everything tastes better with Tip Top. Pour over topping with a creamier taste.
Now that London Transport's Sunday fares are even lower, what a good reason to get out and enjoy London at its best. The most you can pay is £1.20 return on the tube, children 40p. Only 30p single anywhere on the bus, children 10p. It's just the ticket. Better than sitting at home.
They're always in on a Sunday normally.
Really? London Transport cheap Sunday fares, another good reason to go out on Sunday.
Bird's eye potato waffles are wobbly versatile. They go with beans, bangers, bacon, burgers, fish fingers, eggs in, eggs on, yam on, steak chops. Grill 'em, bake 'em, fry 'em, eat 'em. Bird's eye potato waffles are wobbly versatile.
Deputy Führer Hess wants to see you at National Party headquarters in Munich, and he wants to see you right now.
Part 2 of Inside the Third Reich is tomorrow night at 8 o'clock.
Summer on Channel 4, and a new series which explores the relationships between mothers and daughters as familiar faces talk frankly and honestly with Belle Mooney.
Were there ever times when she needed mothering?
Oh, God, I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were, and she didn't get it. I mean, that's something that as an adult I look back with great regret. Yes, and she didn't get enough of it. That's the honest truth.
Then it starts, you see. Every time I open my mouth, you jump into it. And I don't mean it. I don't mean to jump, and she doesn't mean to say it. Do you know what I mean?
And it's a sort of, you can feel it's an old pattern repeating itself from years back.
She didn't like me to go up to her and put my arms around her in front of people, you know. But in the quietness of the two of us, you know, just the two of us on our own, we were, you know, I could do that. I could go and say, oh, you silly little old thing, you know, things like that.
Barbara Windsor in the first Mothers by Daughters at 10:30 tomorrow on Channel 4.
Tonight, a disturbing investigation about the unemployed teenagers who die or are seriously injured at work on the Youth Opportunity Training Schemes. Join us after the break.
When you've got a pal, he's your friend for good. You look after each other like best friends should. There are times of laughter, times you've been away. He's pleased to see you when you're home to stay.
All dogs love marrowbone, so give your best friend Pal dog food. The marrowbone he loves, plus all the meaty goodness he really needs.
So give him Pal, 'cause he's your best friend.
Now, Sharon from the canteen is a star, without a doubt. The trouble is, she knows it. Still, I thought I'd ask her out. I was doing very nicely when this mouth from sales called Rick moves in, all teeth and cufflinks and half a mile too slick. I don't know what girl's seeing him. I do, it makes you sick. Stay sharp to the bottom of the glass. Now, there are times a man must do those things a man must do. I went straight up to Rick and lied, "Here, mate, a call for you." When he was gone, I said, "It seems his wife is down with flu, and all the kids." "Oh, sure," she says, "I never even knew." "I know," I said, "it's shameful how some blokes will lie to you." Stay sharp to the bottom of the glass. Stay sharp.
Fancy getting away from it all for a weekend? You should take a Swan National weekend break. We'll provide you with a wire registration car for the whole weekend and arrange 2 nights bed and breakfast, all from only £21 each, if there's 4 of you. Go with your friends or take the family. Go now, go later in the season. The price is fixed from only £21. And you can choose from 200 beautiful places round Britain. Your local Swan National office can arrange a break now or call 01 388 1122.
Save £200 on Harp Central Heating and get your first 2 services free. Nothing to pay till January. Ring 464 6575 now.
At the Royal Tournament, Earl's Court until July the 30th. Too big for the screen. It must be seen. Book now, 01834 9090.
The new Renault 11. It's tough on the streets.
The first time you use oil of Ulay, you'll discover how light it is. Light enough to let your skin absorb it in a moment. And so refreshing you can almost feel this delicate tropical moist blend helping to replace lost oils and moisture, leaving your skin feeling soft, supple and looking young. Discover the secret of oil of Ulay, a secret of young-looking skin.
"16-year-old Sean O'Brien was fatally injured last year on the Youth Opportunities programme. His parents thought the accident in Strathclyde was unique.
Somebody called my wife up one day, Manpower Services Commission, expressed their condolences and said, "You know, Mrs. O'Brien, this has never happened in a Manpower Services Commission before," making it to our way of thinking that Sean's was the first death are the only death. I've since found out there's been, I think, 16, 17 deaths since 1980.
The safety of teenagers on youth opportunity training programs organised by the Manpower Services Commission is the subject of tonight's TVI. 7 deaths and 300 serious injuries in the past year. So, are the practical supervision and the legal protection adequate? The government-assisted work schemes offering 6 months or a year's work experience are at the heart of the government help to the young unemployed. 1 million teenagers have been through the Youth Opportunities Programme, or YOP, and now the government is expanding and renaming the idea the Youth Training Scheme, or YTS. For the school leavers without much hope of a job, the schemes do offer experience of work, but they're not employed in the legal sense of the word. And as Dennis Tui's investigation reveals, that's where the safety problem lies.
St Pancras Station, London. Arriving on a train from Sheffield, a father who has lost a son and found a purpose. His name is Richard Kane. He's a single parent. His son was killed on the Youth Opportunities Programme. He's come to London to discuss his legal challenge to the body that manages youth training schemes, the Manpower Services Commission. Derek Kane was 17 when he was killed in an accident at work last December. The news was bluntly delivered to his father.
It was a very big shock how it was presented to me, actually. Because 2 policemen come to my house while I was in the middle of doing my weekly wash. And he knocked on the door and came in, and he just said, "You Mr. Kane?" So I said, "Yes." And he just come straight out with it. He says, "Sorry, but your son's been killed down at where the company is working."
Derek Kane had been working on a 6-month youth opportunities scheme set up by the Manpower Services Commission. His place of work was the waste paper distributing firm of Plums in Sheffield. On the 20th of December last year, he was working on the paper shredding and baling machine.
Well, we're shoving 20 tons of paper through that machine per hour. Like a giant funnel at the top of this machine, the paper had to go in that funnel on a conveyor belt. Because the conveyor belt was being overloaded, it was throwing it outside the area of the funnel where the paper had to go, onto the platform down below where he was stood. And on occasions, that platform was 3-4 inches deep in waste material, cardboard and paper.
This picture, shown at the inquest, shows Derek Kane's body on the factory floor. He died of a fractured skull and cerebral hemorrhage. No one saw the accident, but his father believes he must have struck his head against the blades of the shredding machine.
While he was operating that machine, he had to stand on that, which was only 2 or 3 feet wide, 4'6" off the ground, work with 1 foot on a pedal, while at the same time having to push a door open with a broom handle leaning over the machine so that this shredder blade could go through that door that he was pushing over. So you've got a case of stood on one leg, the other leg operating a pedal to work the machine with the blade was connected to, and having to shove a door open with a broom handle at the same time. So I presume that with all that waste paper and cardboard on that platform, it would have been quite easy for him to have tripped up on that.
The firm has since been fined for 7 breaches of safety law, including that it was not registered under the Factories Act, did not ensure the safety of its employees, and that the baling machine was not securely fenced. Since the death of his son last December, Richard Kane has made his home in Sheffield an unofficial information centre, gathering news of other deaths and serious accidents under YOP schemes from people like the Holmes family in Northampton.
A lot of people will know that in Sheffield there was a young lad, Derek Kane, who was killed on a youth opportunity programme. And I feel that when Peter had his accident, not enough notice was taken of that to avoid this accident happening to Derek Kane. If they'd have taken notice of Peter's accident, this lad need not have died at all. What's that?
2 years ago, when he was 17 and working on the Youth Opportunities Scheme, Peter Holmes had both his feet cut off in an accident at a Northampton factory. Since then, by his own willpower and with his parents' constant support, he's made brave and steady progress. But his doctors have told him that his old ambition to be a lorry driver can never be achieved. The accident took place in a mixing machine in a soap factory. Peter describes what happened on the day he was crippled.
I left the factory about 12:30, and I got here about 1:15 and had dinner. I left here about 1:15, got to work about 1:30. I got back in the factory, and she told me to clean the machine out. So I got in it, started cleaning it, and she told me to get out the machine, so I did. And she told me to get back in it, start cleaning it out. And she went out about 5 minutes. She came in and she switched it on. And she must have forgot I was in there, that's all.
When the machine was switched on, Peter was standing on this blade. His feet were severed at the ankles.
They got me in the ambulance, and I said to the ambulance men, everyone's going to go mad about this. And they took me down to General Hospital. I got in there, and then Mum and Dad came to me, and I put my hands around them.
The firm, Nimbus Laboratories, were charged and fined for failure to provide a guard on the machine and to provide a safe place of work. For Peter, as for many others, the Youth Opportunities Programme was the only alternative to the dole. It was on his last working day on the programme that the accident took place. 2 years later, he's learning to cope with a new, limited way of life. While his family, through their lawyers, prepare compensation claims against the company, they've become aware that other families have suffered as much and more, that they're part of a network of grief. In Sheffield, Richard Kane's grief for his own dead son has made him a determined crusader. His research makes him deeply critical of how the schemes have been run.
It's really told me that it's wide-scale, it's a national problem, and that these abusers they're consistent all around country. And the accident where my son was involved was not a one-off kind of thing. It is that the people I've spoke to that's had the same fatal injuries in their families have all been through faults of the actual system how they run here. Not checking them and no supervision.
2 months before Derek Kane, there was another death near Glasgow. 16-year-old Sean O'Brien was fatally injured. His father tells the story.
As far as I'm led to believe, Sean was given the job of cleaning down the frame. I take it was a sort of frame for a conveyor belt system. So he was handed a pot of paraffin, which was in a container, and a rag, and he started at the top on a sort of scaffolding, and he was cleaning it down overhead, and all this paraffin and rust inhibitor was falling on top of him all the time, like, you know. So he started, and he was working down, all this is soaking into his overalls, working down. So it was October of last year, and it was a bit cold, so what I heard was he went down for a heat and stood at a salamander heater, a paraffin heater. And he was standing there chatting to his pal who was on the same course as him. And his pal says to me after the accident, Sean says, "Look at my overalls." He says, "Look at the steam coming off them." He didn't realise it was paraffin and this inhibitor turning into a vapour. And that was the last thing that Sean said. He just exploded into flames.
Sean had been working for 7 weeks on a Youth Opportunities programme at the Rose Hall Engineering Works in Coatbridge. He had suffered 65% burns in the accident. His father describes his condition when he saw him in hospital.
He was in a terrible condition. His head was actually black from the neck up. His body was terrible burns for the waist up. I couldn't see his arms, they were bandaged. But his head actually got the worst of it. It was like a piece of charcoal.
Was he ever aware that you were there? Were you ever able to make contact with him, talk with him?
His mother, when his mother arrived at the hospital, he recognised her. He says, "Hello, Mum." No problem. But when I got there, he was unconscious. He never regained consciousness. He died 5 days later.
The factory inspectorate are prosecuting the company under the safety laws, and Dennis O'Brien is preparing a civil action for damages. And like other parents, he's bitterly critical of the Manpower Services Commission who organised the scheme.
In one view, there's somebody obviously should have been going round these factories, checking them out, a sort of liaison officer between the Manpower Services Commission, that is the technical college where I was working, going round all these factories, checking out with these lads if there are any complaints, how they're treating you, what are you doing, do you like it? I've spoke to 2 or 3 of the lads that were at the same course as Sean was doing, and they were quite annoyed that this wasn't happening.
Has it helped you to find that other families with children on YOP schemes have been through similar tragedies? Has it helped you to make contact with them?
Well, I was under the impression that Sean was the only death. One day at work, it was at lunch break, I think it was, I was reading the paper and I caught sight of this paragraph of Mr. Kane down in Sheffield, and for the rest of the day it was going round my head, and I come home that night and I says to my wife, "I'm going to phone this Mr. Kane," and it was only for then that I realised, after I talked to Mr. Kane, and he told me how many accidents there had been this year, I really understood that Sean's wasn't the only one, and all these lads is getting hurt at work, and nobody ever seems to know about it. I mean, it's really, it's not a disgrace, it's disgusting.
The same conviction has led Richard Kane in Sheffield to spend up to 8 hours a day collecting evidence.
Well, I really can't see any other way of doing this, actually, because by doing this, where more and more people are involved and more people are asking questions, is there anything up with these MSC schemes?
Last December, in Ebbw Vale, in the same month that Derek Kane died, Andrew Lewis, aged 16, was killed on a YOP scheme. Andrew's father is a steelworker, but in an area of high unemployment, the sub-post office the family had bought was to be the future. But the future was blighted on the 2nd of December last year.
Just before 5 o'clock, I was serving a lady in the office, and I felt something, and I said, "Oh my God." She said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I don't know." But I felt something, I knew something. And then when 5:15 came, I didn't hear him come home. Every day he came home, and he always changed into second gear by here before he came round the corner on his bike. And he didn't come. At 5:30, I said to him, because he was working in here, "There's something wrong with our boy. He's not come home." And he said, "Oh, don't look on the black side. He's just working overtime." I said, "No. I got a feeling here there's something wrong with my boy." I knew. Then 5 to 6, the police came to the back door, and the inspector was there and another one. So I opened the door and I said, "It's my boy with his bike, isn't it?" He said, "No, love, it isn't his bike. Where's your husband? You go and sit down." When he told me that, I knew that there was something drastically wrong. So he went and he spoke to my husband, and he came back and he said Andrew was dead. I just couldn't believe it.
Still can't believe it.
We just can't take it in. Just shattered.
Andrew Lewis was working on the Rassau industrial estate on the outskirts of Ebervale. He was killed when he was caught in a machine that flattens insulation material at the U-Save insulation factory.
At this factory where our son worked, I don't think there was any guarding system at all there, you know. The stop button wasn't on the machine, and there was no guard on the flattening machine, which my boy went through. I mean, this should never have happened, all this machinery should be guarded before these youngsters are taken and then supervised, shown what to do.
Surely these factories can be inspected every few weeks. Anything can happen in a few weeks. Something must be done whereby they're inspected every few weeks and made safe. For the sake of other children. I mean, we wouldn't want others to go through what we are going through.
But other parents have gone through it. We've shown just 3 cases from a national total of 17 YOP deaths in the last 3 years.
Come in, Mr. Kane. Did you have a nice trip?
Yes.
Come and sit down then, will you? I've been through the papers which Joan Maynard, your...
In London, Richard Kane's solicitor, Frank Clifford, discusses legal strategy.
And I take the view that we have the basis of an action against the Department of Employment, against Mr. Tebbit, the Secretary for Employment, and the Manpower Services Commission. I've been through the Manpower Services Commission's reports on safety, and I take the view that there's been a great lack of care from the top downwards, to such an extent that the placing officer who put your lad into this place really had no basic understanding about safety. Otherwise, he would have taken the elementary steps of checking, first of all, that the factory was registered, which it wasn't. He would have ensured that no trainee was put on the machinery there, and from the inquest depositions it appears he never looked at the machinery, never saw it operating, and took no positive steps to make sure that your lad was safeguarded. Now, the question is whether the chain of responsibility comes down from the minister. My view in law is that the minister has a direct responsibility because only he has the capacity to bring together the people who could have made it safe. And within his Department of Employment, he has the Factory Inspectorate, which is probably the biggest concentration of talent on safety in the world.
The factory inspector in Sheffield, Mrs. Edwards, that was doing my case, told me that the MSC had never ever got in touch with their department in Sheffield to find out whether companies were registered that they were sending yacht workers to. They've never ever done that, even a phone call in Sheffield.
Well, that seems to be borne out by the facts here, because at the inquest, the coroner conducted it magnificently, in my opinion, very competently, and the questions put to the Manpower Services Commission people were directed to this point about liaison between the Factory Inspectorate and the Manpower Services Commission. And it's very plain that it didn't exist in any practical sense. Now, the question is, what do you want me to do in terms of advice? I believe we have a course of action against the Department of Employment, against the Minister, and against the Manpower Services Commission. What do you want me to do?
Well, I think we should go ahead with it.
The Manpower Services Commission were not willing to discuss individual cases with us, only general policy. The Chief Executive of the Commission's Training Division, Roger Daw.
First, let me say that there's nothing we can say about this which can in any way affect the sort of tragedy of any single accident, any single fatality on YTS and the suffering of the young people and of their parents. But if we do look at the general safety record, I mean, the fact is it's a lot better than for industry generally. Last year we had about 500,000 young people going through the programme. There were about 7 fatalities, about 300 serious accidents. And we think, and it's very difficult to make comparisons, but we think the accident risk in the youth scheme is about half that for working in industry generally.
You say you think, but the problem is you can't compare the figures because they're calculated on a different basis.
They're calculated on a different basis, but making broad assumptions, it looks pretty clear that the record is something like the accident risk is a third to a half for industry generally.
You published a report a year ago in which you said that standards of health and safety on YOP schemes should be improved. Why did you think it necessary to say that, and what improvements have been made?
Because we're constantly concerned to improve the safety record. As I've said, it's good, but we want to make it better. We've increased the emphasis in our own staff on looking at safety. We've discussed this in the Youth Training Board with the TUC and CBI. I mean, the fact is we want to do the maximum we can to make the youth training scheme a very safe scheme in which to work. That's our duty.
The Manpower Services Commission run 3 youth training centres, and there are places for young people in many other training centres around the country. As young people come into training, safety consciousness is part of what they're taught. They're expected regularly to fill in safety checklists in their own workshop and to visit others and do likewise. Their comments are noted and discussed with instructors. But the world outside is a lot less safe than here. However hard it may be to make comparison with industry generally, total accidents on YOP schemes between 1981 and 82 increased by nearly 90%, while the number of young people involved in the programme went up by only 53%.
Don't forget to keep checking it.
Against a higher accident rate, a cutback in the number of factory inspectors, the safety watchdogs, of 16% in the last 3 years.
Always remember to keep the crest of the flame just on the surface.
Meanwhile, in workplaces very different from this training centre, safety may come a poor second to the attraction of cheap labour, and owners and managers can make dubious promises to the MSC. Sheila McKechnie is Health and Safety Officer of ASTMS.
It seems to me that there's been a bit of shilly-shallying going on between the Department of Employment and the Health and Safety Executive on who really is going to make sure these children are looked after. As it stands, the situation is that the schemes go into MSC officers, and the MSC officers are responsible for the health and safety provisions. As far as I'm aware, they only do that by looking at employers' applications. Now, that is an immediate problem. There's a second problem. MSC staff are not trained in health and safety, and whereas you or I or anybody else might recognise a safety problem, what about all these dangerous chemicals in workplaces? What about all the buildings that they're being asked to renovate, where there may be asbestos, there may be very acute electrical hazards? I mean, it'd be quite nonsense to suggest that somebody who's got a job in an MSC office could actually check the provisions of workplaces to make sure they're safe.
Well, what we can't do is have an MSC official standing beside the young person for every moment of his working day, every day. What we can do is have good monitoring arrangements, and we shall have these in the youth training schemes, where we regularly visit schemes, where we make checks on the safety precautions in the individual projects.
Do you have the staff and the resources to do the amount of monitoring that you wish to do?
We do, and if I could just move on to the youth training scheme, I mean, under that scheme, we'll be using major managing agents, large companies, local authorities, consortia, employers and education people working together, and we can work with them as managing agents to monitor the scheme generally, including the monitoring of safety.
Monitoring of safety at a factory in Sheffield last year could have left Richard Kane with 2 sons instead of 1. What he's now seeking, with the help of his surviving son, is to test MSC responsibility in the courts.
What I really resent most is that a big department like MSC, which is a big government department, couldn't make a better job of checking that company out before he worked there than what they did. Every now and again you get a slip-up, choose what it is in what profession, but to get 7 charges when it's supposed to be inspected by the MSC link officers, and for the company to plead guilty before it even went to court, it's quite obvious that the company knew that that factory wasn't suitable for young people, but yet the MSc passed it.
In the sub-post office in Ebbw Vale, the parents of Andrew Lewis have a special interest in how the Kane case develops. But nothing can fill the emptiness of their loss.
It have altered our life altogether. We just can't go
We
out
used to be lively 40-year-olds. We dressed like old fogies.
We used to go out and do a lot of sequence dancing 3 or 4 nights a week. We can't even do that now. We don't go out and meet anybody. Just can't face people.
Just can't mix.
They've altered our lives completely, this have.
What do you do when you do go out?
We go walking.
Up on top of the mountain anyway.
We walk the mountains. Fortunately, we have mountains to walk, which we do.
We was
walk the
up there
mountains.
last night for a good walk. Night before. We should be out tonight again as soon as we shut our shop. And this is it. We find we have peace and quiet on top of the mountains out the way of everybody. We'd love to go dancing, man, but I don't know. I guess can't face it yet.
Here's a wild new taste from America. Squirt, America's softest big drink.
Buying an A registration car? Stop! You could be paying more than you need to. Don't do anything until you've checked your Peugeot Talbot dealer's incredible summertime special.
Come on down for the summertime special.
The Talbot Horizon Summertime Special for an amazing $3,495.
Come on down.
The Talbot Solara Summertime Special, only $3,995.
Come on down for the summertime.
And remember, these are on-the-road prices, so hurry while stocks last, and don't miss the summertime specials at your Peugeot Talbot dealer now.
How do you put together what's ahead on ITV, Channel 4 and TVAM this summer? Get TV Times every week.
At 10:30, The Day of Reckoning dawns for Shelley, starring Howell Bennett. That's right after the news. This is Thames from London. The time is 10 o'clock at the studios of ITN, Sandy Gall and Martin Lewis.
MPs angry at government's 4% pay offer. Mr. Britain rules out a referendum on hanging. 120 million are at risk in Africa. England's fast bowlers fight back against New Zealand. And the tiger who enjoys a cold bath. Good evening. The government is tonight facing a growing revolt from MPs of all parties because of its attempt to limit their pay rise to 4%. An independent review body said they should get 31%. Today, the former leader of the Commons, Mr. Norman St. John Stevens, accused the government of breaking its promise to pay the full amount. MPs at present earn £14,500 a year. The government's pay rise would give them another £580, but the full increase would take them to over £19,000 a year. However, the government has agreed that MPs' allowances for secretarial and research work could go up by 50% to nearly £13,000 if justified. The Commons will debate the pay rise on Tuesday.
Mrs. Thatcher has been insisting that members of Parliament show the same kind of restraint over their pay that the government is demanding of others. But tonight's meeting of the Conservative Backbench 1922 Committee was vociferous, revealing a great deal of anger on the issue. In speech after speech, Tory MPs condemned the 4%, saying that ministers had to get the message, they just weren't prepared to accept it. Their argument is that time after time they've seen independent recommendations for pay increases cut back by the government of the day. Mr Jack Dorman, chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party, said feelings among Labour MPs were also running high. But I suggested there wasn't much public sympathy for a 31% increase for MPs.
Well, I think the answer to that must be no, but having said that, I don't think the feeling against MPs on this is as strong as it used to be. But you know, there are at least two things that ought to be said about that. First of all, I've said it's an independent body, and if we were to say that, for example, if the engineers had put it to an independent body, teachers, miners, and then the government had said, well, yes, we agreed with the independent body, but you're only going to get 4%, I think something would be said about it. And I think one more thing ought to be said. I think that MPs of this House of Commons or any other House of Commons would be rather arrogant if they said we are the best possible House of Commons that could exist. And I haven't the slightest doubt that the comparatively bad pay and the comparatively bad conditions do deter some people from coming into Parliament.
Mr Dormand is demanding the full 31%, with the support of some Conservatives like the former Leader of the House, Mr Norman St John Stevens, who said the government were breaking their previous promises. But there have been backstage talks to head off the revolt among Conservative MPs, with warnings that insisting on more than 4% won't make them popular in their constituency parties. Tonight, the chairman of the 1922 committee, Mr Edward Ducan, has been proposing a possible compromise, that the 31% increase be phased in over the next 4 years. It's up to the government in the end to decide whether to pay the money, but they could be defeated by a compromise proposal of some kind.
That is a possibility. Indeed, if the revolt is as strong as what I understand it to be, then I think the Prime Minister must have some regard for the demands which are now being made upon her tonight.
2 months ago, the top salaries review body reported that British MPs were worse off than many of their Western colleagues. MPs here earn more than their counterparts in the Irish Republic and Holland, but they're well behind MPs in Italy, West Germany and France. And they're even further behind politicians in America, who earn more than 3 times the basic British salary of an MP.
Congressman Vic Fazio is one of 435 members of the House of Representatives and one of 45 representing the state of California. By contrast, there are only 100 senators, 2 from each state. Congressmen and senators all earn the same salary, the equivalent of £46,000. Each congressman and senator is provided with a suite of offices on Capitol Hill, and Mr Fazio's is typical, an inner office for him, 2 outer offices for his staff. Senators' allowances vary according to the size of their state, but each congressman receives from the government a set allowance to pay his staff of £240,000 a year. No congressman may employ more than 22 staff. Mr Fazio has 20, 11 here in Washington and 9 in California. They earn, on average, £12,000 each. To run his office and pay for travel, Mr Fazio receives an annual allowance of £111,000. It has allowed him to install a computer with 8 terminals. The computer stores information on bills and amendments and has a word processor for speeches, press releases and letters. All mail bearing the congressman's signature is free. So, salary £46,000, total allowances £350,000 a year. There is a limit on outside earnings. A congressman cannot earn more than 30% of his salary again from outside engagements such as speeches, and there's a limit of £1,300 per speech. There's a generous inflation-proof pension, mainly designed to guard against losing an election. After 20 years on the Hill, you can retire regardless of age.
We are, compared to European terms, well compensated. But given the expenditures that we're required to make to maintain 2 households, etc., we find that we're not certainly as well off as many of our constituents think we are.
Congressmen's salaries went up by 15% last December, only the 12th time they've been raised in 200 years. John Suchet, News at 10 on Capitol Hill.
Here, the Home Secretary, Mr Leon Britton, has ruled out a national referendum on capital punishment after the overwhelming rejection of the death penalty by the Commons last night. Mr Britton told MPs they were unlikely to vote again on the issue for a long time. Last night, MPs decisively defeated all 6 attempts to bring back hanging, with majorities ranging from 81 for the murder of a police officer to 175 for murder during a robbery. The Police Federation said today it felt let down by the result. It wanted to meet Mr. Britton, it said, to try and strengthen the law against violent crime.
A scheme to allow some prisoners to serve their sentences part-time has been recommended by MPs in the All-Party Penal Affairs Group. The idea, already tried in Belgium and the Netherlands, is for less serious offenders to carry on their normal work while serving their sentences in special weekend prisons or by going back to jail at night. The group's chairman, the Labour MP Mr. Robert Kilroy-Silk, said part-time imprisonment would cut overcrowding, give an offender time to compensate his victim, reduce family disruption, and cut down ill effects of prolonged contact with criminals.
The government is backing a private member's bill aimed at banning horror videos. It proposes a new board of video censors, a video rating system similar to the one governing cinema films, and fines of up to £10,000 for dealers breaking the new laws. The bill, introduced by Mr. Graham Bright, Conservative MP for Luton South, is expected to get all-party support and could become law by the end of next year.
Some divorcees will be able to remarry in church from next year, probably by Easter, the General Synod of the Church of England decided today. Each applicant will have to be vetted and backed by their local bishop. The Synod, meeting in York, voted by 284 votes to 143 in favour of the new ruling, although the Bishop of Durham said the church had made a massive bed of nails for itself.
Mr. Len Murray, the General Secretary of the TUC, has made another attempt to end the 7-week strike at the Financial Times, which has cost the paper £7 million. He's written to the leader of the National Graphical Association, Mr. Joe Wade, urging him to accept a peace plan put forward by ACAS. If not, it's understood the NGA could face disciplinary action from the TUC. The strike involves 24 NGA machine managers who are demanding £322 for a 4-night week. The ACAS mediator recommended they should get £304 for a 4-night week, which they'd been offered by the management.
If the Financial Times is to succeed with its plan to print elsewhere, it must split the men who work here in the presses. It needs the support of the SOGAT trade union, which provides printing machine assistance, against the better-paid machine operators from the National Graphical Association. The FT's chairman believes they could get that support.
We have, in fact, produced a plan to the General Secretary of SOGAT, Mr. Keyes, which he is studying, and under certain circumstances that plan would obviously be studied further.
But could you seriously anticipate a positive response from SOGAT on that issue?
Under certain circumstances, I believe I could.
To get the FT back to work, SOGAT would have to agree to do jobs now reserved for the NGA and risk the anger of other trade unionists. Journalists who join the revolt might be blacked from working for any other paper. SOGAT's leadership is prepared to talk, but will only decide finally once the TUC has exhausted the negotiating process. Although on the surface this dispute is about pay, it involves a much broader issue of new technology and which union should use it. If the Financial Times can produce a newspaper without NGA labour, it breaks the effective monopoly that union has over the introduction of new computer-based machinery. That would have untold consequences for the rest of Fleet Street. Mark Webster, News at 10, at the Financial Times headquarters.
A vast area of Africa is in the grip of drought and famine. Millions of people are affected, and the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization says they need help urgently. A report in part 2. Also, the 10-inch baby that's now bouncing. England's bowlers make amends. And Craig Stadler burns up Royal Birkdale. That's in a couple of minutes.
Hello. May I join you? Care to try this Matthias White? You probably won't have had it before. Cheers. Well?
Delicious. Just like last time, darling.
Ah, hello, Rosemary. Just checking. Some moments should only be shared with Matthias.
After your exams, put the different banks to the test. Which was the first bank to offer school leavers a check guarantee card in return for a salary check? which was the first bank to offer a special interest loan to graduates about to start work, which was the first bank to introduce business officers to advise students on financial matters, which is the only high street bank to open its doors on a Saturday.
Could you all stop writing now, please?
Because only when you know the right answers can you hope to make the right choice.
Right now, Warwick Wright will give you an exceptional deal on your new Peugeot or Talbot for August A registration and will pay for all on-the-road extras. Talbot Samblers, Horizons, Peugeot 305 Saloons, Estates and 505 Estates. So for a great new car deal, get down to Warwick Wright of Chiswick right now or phone 01995 1466.
Vivas, the sophisticated body spray. Never be taken for granted.
Today, when they invited me along to this turnout, I took the precaution of bringing enough of the amber nectar to go around. Looks like I did the right thing too, because that stuff looks to be about as popular as a rattlesnake and a lucky dip. True. Must be worse than I thought.
Foster's, the Australian for lager.
Africa is suffering its worst drought and famine for years, and 120 million people throughout the vast continent, that's twice the population of Britain, are affected, according to an emergency report from the United Nations Food Agency. The agency is calling for 600,000 tons of food to be sent to the stricken areas without delay.
It's 10 years since a drought in the Sahel Desert of North and Central Africa claimed 250,000 lives. In the years since, that desert has slowly advanced. It now stretches from almost one side of the continent to the other. And with it has come a drought now affecting 18 countries, sweeping across and down through the continent. It threatens a disaster greater than 1973. In Ethiopia, for example, there's an expanding desert, there's war, and now there's famine born out of the two. Today's report offers the first thorough independent survey of the enormous human tragedy facing Ethiopia. 3 million people at risk, the report says, more than half of them living in war zones. Yet elsewhere, this report diagnoses long-term problems potentially as serious as this, and heralding years of starvation for millions of others. Take Zimbabwe, for example, potentially one of the richest countries on the continent. 2 years ago, Zimbabwe was producing a record 2 million tons of maize. It was feeding not just itself, but some of its hard-pressed neighbours as well, because it had food to export. Now 80% of Zimbabwe is affected by drought. The harvest this year has been devastated. The crop will be 50% down, the report says. Already the cost here is being counted. Tens of thousands of cattle have died. And because there's simply not enough food, the wardens in the game reserves are taking the only way out for species like the elephant and the rhino, shooting them with drug pellets, and then shipping them off to zoos around the world, where their survival is guaranteed. But it's the face of human starvation this far south, which raises dire fears among the relief agencies.
This is by far the worst that we've ever heard of. This is going to be a massive scale, perhaps the first of the mega famines in the continent of Africa. There are 120 million people in severe risk now of dying through lack of food.
But is there any way that we in the industrialised world can even begin to solve the problem?
Now, the first thing I'd ask the world to do is to give those countries hope. And by that I mean to try and get the appalling root cause of famine destroyed. And that root cause is poverty.
To destroy poverty, the world outside would have to write off Africa's massive debts and then redouble its investment in the continent. Something that's as unthinkable as the world meeting today's appeal for 600,000 tons of food and $60 million in relief aid immediately.
The United States Senate has voted tonight against a new neutron weapon system. The plan was to make a new short-range nuclear artillery shell that could carry a neutron warhead, but the Senate, which has a Republican majority, voted by 67 to 30 against. A Democratic senator, Mr. Sam Nunn, who led the opposition, said a battlefield neutron weapon made nuclear war more likely in Western Europe. And also in America, a baby who weighed just over a pound when she was born, 4 months prematurely in a hospital there, has, in the words of the doctors, beaten all the odds and survived. Faith Maturowski was so small when she was born last February that a waterbed had to be made for her out of a plastic bag. She was only 10 inches long. 5 months later, Faith now weighs 5 pounds, is healthy, and has been allowed out of hospital. Her doctors say that with new technology, they expect to save even smaller babies in future.
The search for the murderer of the Manchester art student Susan Renhard could be helped by faces on a holiday video shot by an Australian tourist. The tourist was in the Castleton area on the day that Susan's body was found 2.5 weeks ago, and part of the video shows the hillside at Cave Dale where she was attacked. Home Office experts are working on enlargements of 10 recognisable people. Today, Susan Renhardt's funeral was held near her family's home in the West Midlands. With her parents, her 22-year-old fiancé. The couple plan to marry next year. Also in the congregation were Derbyshire detectives leading the murder inquiry.
Tomorrow is the last day for nominations in the contest for the Labour leadership. Michael Foot's successor will be chosen in October. In our third profile of the 4 contenders, David Walter takes a look at Eric Heffer, now vice-chairman of the party he joined at the age of 16.
Eric Heffer is the most left-wing candidate in the field. At 61, he's also the oldest. He's a self-taught former carpenter who believes the party needs a leader with deep roots in the working class. Eric Heffer's been MP for the Walton constituency in Liverpool since 1964. Before that, he was a shop steward on construction sites and in shipyards there, and a local councillor for 6 years. He's proud of the radical socialist traditions in the city. Always on the left of the party, he campaigned against the Wilson government's plans for laws to curb the unions in 1969, and later in 1975 was sacked as a junior minister for defying Harold Wilson over the common market. In his 8 years on Labour's executive, Eric Heffer has taken a leading part in the left's campaigns for reforming the way the party selects its parliamentary candidates and its leader. But last year, with the rise of the right on the executive, he lost his key post as chairman of the organisation committee, though he stayed in Michael Foot's shadow cabinet. So where does he stand on the key issues which divide the candidates? Well, he's not against the government discussing incomes with the unions, but he doesn't want a pay policy which concentrates on keeping down the workers' wages. On defence, he makes no apologies for supporting unilateral disarmament, though he stresses he believes in a proper conventional defence policy. He thinks Labour were damaged in the election by their divisions on the issue, not by the policy in their manifesto. On the common market, Eric Heffer accepts that Labour lost the argument at the last election. He believes a future Labour government might well still pull Britain out of the EEC, but the priority at the moment is to work for a socialist Europe. He's against expelling supporters of militant from the party, though he doesn't agree with their views. He thinks the way to deal with the tendencies' supporters is to defeat them in argument. Eric Heffer promises an all-out attack inside and outside Parliament against the government. With Tony Benn out of Parliament and unable to stand, he makes the best bet for the Bennites. If his intervention stops Neil Kinnock winning on the first ballot, they can claim a bigger say in the party's future.
An old Welsh soldier who shared his war rations with a starving Dutch family 40 years ago has been given a very special thank you. Nick Partridge of HTV Wales has the story.
This wartime photograph was the only link former Rhondda miner and soldier Roy Purnell had kept with the Dutch family he fed and liberated during the Second World War. But they never forgot him, and today, 40 years later, the boys got together to find him and bring him back to Holland for a holiday. It was an emotional meeting, particularly for their elderly mother.
You're welcome. Huh? Yeah, huh?
But what does Roy remember about those children?
Oh, very quiet and innocent and looking a little bit, you know, well, they needed food to me, you know. So pitiful, you know. Not now, though. Oh, no, not now.
How were you able to help them?
Well, I was giving them whatever I could, my rations, and my friends, my mates, you know, getting their rations, giving it to them. Coal, coke, whatever I could get. What they do in the time is, yeah, I would give them all I could get.
And there was lots to see and old times to talk about. But there was a sad side to the visit. Roy lost 2 friends in the battle for the town. Nick Partridge, 4 News at 10, Helmond, Holland.
Now cricket. England fought back quickly in the first test after New Zealand had bowled them out for 209. Derek Randall was 75 not out. He was the only batsman to cope with the bowling of Richard Hadley, who took 6 for 53. New Zealand was 17 for 3 when bad light stopped play.
The poor attendance at the Oval suggested New Zealand are not the biggest crowd pullers in cricket. They've never won a test in England, but Hadley's hostility soon showed they can no longer be taken lightly. He followed Fowler's dismissal with the great prize of Gower's wicket, and England, who'd elected to bat, were 18 for 2. Lamb began to repair the damage with some dashing boundaries, which made the pitch look a lot more friendly. But when the swing of Cairns pierced his defence, New Zealand seemed to be hugging themselves in disbelief. Then Hadley launched another lethal blow right into Tavery's mouth. The opener retired in pain, and England were left in disarray. The crowd was still sparse in numbers and in dress when Botham began what most people hoped would be his revival innings. But the ungenerous Hadley soon put an end to those thoughts. Tavery, who'd come back bravely, had taken his score to 45 when he went to a disastrous run-out. Only Randall, recalled to England's ranks, rose above this indifferent batting display with a typically unusual blend of strokes. It was his unbeaten 75 that saved England from total embarrassment. Edmonds marked his return to Test cricket with a smart return to Bracewell. The rest were left in Hadley's trail of havoc as he completed England's destruction in style to finish with 6 for 53. But Bob Willis, no doubt disgusted by his batsman, proved just as devastating. Wright caught by Gower off the 3rd ball of the innings. Next over, Willis had Jeff Crow caught by Randall. When Cowans knocked down his first home Test wicket, New Zealand were 10 for 3 and looking even worse than England. Jeremy Thompson, ITN Sport at the Oval.
The 16-stone American Craig Stadler set a new course record on the first day of the Open at Royal Birkdale. He had a 7 under par 64 to take the lead, 3 strokes ahead of Bernard Langer, Tom Watson and Bill Rogers. Rogers had an Albatross 2, that's 3 under par at the 17th, the first in the Open for 11 years. And the Australian Roger Davis had a hole-in-one. But it was Stadler's day.
On the international circuit, Craig Stadler is known as the Walrus, an animal that's sometimes bad-tempered. And after making 8 birdies, he had good reason to be dissatisfied with himself. Chipping out of the rough at the 17th, he was somewhat tentative. His playing partner, Bernhard Langer, on the other hand, showed more conviction. In trouble on the 18th, Stadler redeemed himself somewhat. He finished 7 under par and has set the pace for others to follow. Britain's Nick Faldo could hardly have had a worse start. At the first 2 holes, he dropped 4 strokes and seemed to be out of contention. But he responded magnificently to the challenge, making 5 birdies and an eagle to finish 4 strokes behind Stadler, an achievement that seemed impossible earlier on. But 1 stroke from former champion Bill Rogers surpassed even Faldo's recovery. He comes to the 17th green to pick his ball out of the hole after firing it in from 228 yards. He'd taken only 2 strokes to cover the 526-yard hole, normally covered in 5 strokes. And the record crowd rose to the American. Ian Edwards, ITN Sport, Royal Birkdale.
Well, the heatwave looks like continuing into next week, and there are signs that it's causing a spending spree in shops and pubs. Some factories have had to go on to overtime to cope with the demand.
After one of the wettest Mays on record, when sales of summer goods seem set for a poor season, some manufacturers can hardly believe their eyes. Sales of sunglasses, for example, are up 60% on last year. Men's hats up 55%. We are, it seems, simply not tempted to buy until the sun actually shines. Even with a holiday booked, we stick with last year's swimsuit until the hot weather here prods us into buying a new one. Ice cream makers are selling in their thousands, as are cold boxes and ice cube trays. We've been out in our hundreds buying hose pipes and all manner of accessories for them. The pests which accompany the hot weather are a bonus for other manufacturers. Insecticides are selling twice as much as normal. Those who benefit most are the ice cream and drink industries. It's 7 years since ice cream companies had such a spell of good weather. Usually, peak time for sales is short and unpredictable, so the companies have to react fast. Most are working round the clock to meet demand. This week, Wars alone will be producing 50 million mouth-watering ice creams. In the last 7 days, sales have increased by 100%. Also this week, the brewers have seen lager sales go through the roof and deliveries treble, making hay while the sun shines before the weather and demand cools.
Well, if you do buy those hose pipes and sprinklers, please don't use them. That's the water-saving message to the nation today from the National Water Council. They might make an exception up in Derbyshire for a rubber plant called Roderick. It's the biggest in Britain outside Kew Gardens and needs regular cooling down after it was temporarily replanted so that its greenhouse could be enlarged. And the council might forgive a tiger called Monday, which is taking a bath a day to cool down at a wildlife park in Northamptonshire. To say nothing of a hippo at Chester Zoo that was clearly in desperate need of a mouthwash. And if you go down to the sea at Bridlington, bare doesn't necessarily mean topless. Just the town circus, giving its animals a welcome splash in the waves of the North Sea. But in Birmingham, those mad dogs, the English women, don't go out in the midday sun. They prefer to go indoors to their local suntan parlours. They say they get a better tan that way.
Well, there you are. That's the news tonight. Good night.
In a moment, the headlines, followed by Shelley.
If you find your sandwiches are getting a bit, rebellious, what they're probably after is a little something on top. They're after the crisp, tangy taste of Heinz sandwich spread. It livens up other fillings, or it's delicious on its own, so bring a little piece back with Heinz sandwich spread and top up a sandwich today.
The people of other nations take a lot of pride in their country's achievements. The Greeks are very proud of this town where every house uses solar power. And the Germans find it hard to contain their pride in a world speed record achieved in a car powered totally by liquid gas. The Chinese are pleased, to say the least, with the prospect of drilling for oil in the South China Sea. And the Australians are delighted with the high-technology casing which makes possible one of the longest undersea telephone cables in the world. Now, all these things must make you feel very proud. No? Well, look, run the film again. Change the music and see what happens. One company is behind all these achievements, and it's British. BP. Britain at its best.
Ever wondered why the Greeks are always throwing their crockery about? It's the only way they can get their coffee out the cups. The thing is, if they really knew about coffee, they'd know that Kenco is probably the best real coffee you can buy. Or as we say, if you're au fait with coffee, you're okay with Kenco. It's not doing their buildings any good at all.
What Car magazine has voted the front-wheel drive Vauxhall Cavalier Family Car of the Year for the 2nd year running? Their reasons: power with economy.
Powerful, with 90 bhp from 1.6 litres. Good economy.
Handling.
Handling is sound.
Space.
Plenty of room inside the light, airy body.
Value.
A very sound family car package.
Test drive the Family Car of the Year. There's a choice of hatchback or saloon. The Vauxhall Cavalier. Better by design.
Hello, Jack. Happy birthday, Jack. Kind of kestrel, Jack. On the house.
Oh, cheers, George. Sorry, your missus in town. Buying you a present. Present?
Happy birthday, darling. Happy birthday, Jack.
Kestrel, the thinking man's lager.
Just because you look fit outside, it doesn't follow you're fit inside. There's evidence that a lot of today's food doesn't contain enough fiber to keep our digestive systems in shape. The richest source of natural fiber is wheat bran, and Kellogg's All Bran is made with wheat bran. So why not eat yourself fitter the easy way with Kellogg's All Bran?
Good evening, the Thames News headlines. Thames Water have banned the use of hose piping throughout the region because of a water shortage. Supplies have dried up in hundreds of homes, mostly in North London. Consumption in the Thames area has risen by 40%. Tonight, Hugh Fish, the authority's chief executive, appealed for a 10% cutback, even if it means taking fewer baths. Scotland Yard are looking for a con man whose sob stories have persuaded at least 35 women to give him money. The streets of Kensington are the hunting grounds for the man who calls himself Eli Woods. He gets sympathy and cash by pretending his family have been killed in a car crash and that he's going to commit suicide. A Euro MP is looking for 20 people who might help unravel the mystery surrounding the death of Anne Chapman, the London journalist murdered in Greece 12 years ago. Richard Cottrell, who's investigating the murder for the European Parliament, wants to trace people who were with her on the Olympic holidays trip between the 11th and 19th of October 1971. The mayor of Moscow, Vladimir Promislov, ran into another protest on the 6th day of his visit to London. Demonstrators angry about Soviet treatment of Jews greeted him as he visited the Karl Marx Library at Clerkenwell Green. Tonight, he eluded demonstrators in Drury Lane by slipping into a back entrance of the musical Cats. An inquest heard today how a killer, still on the loose, laughed hysterically seconds after killing a booking clerk at Balham Tube Station in March. Gilbert Barrett died from shotgun wounds. He was 54. The verdict, unlawful killing. The government have backed a move by a Thames Area MP to clamp down on video nasties. Graham Bright, Conservative MP for Luton South, is introducing a bill for tougher penalties for dealers. It's likely to become law by the end of next year. Thames weather, and the heat wave looks like lasting well into the weekend. Tonight will be hot and humid, with patchy fog. Tomorrow, much the same as today, with a high of 29 degrees centigrade, 84 Fahrenheit, with the chance of thunderstorms. Well, that's it. There'll be more Thames News tomorrow. Now, Shelley.
After your exams, put the different banks to the test. Which was the first bank to offer school leavers a check guarantee card in return for a salary check? Which was the first bank to offer a special interest loan to graduates about to start work? Which was the first bank to introduce business officers to advise students on financial matters? Which is the only high street bank to open its doors on a Saturday?
Could you all stop writing now, please?
Because only when you know the right answers can you hope to make the right choice.
I remember that night in the flicks with me date. We was watching old Rudy. Beryl thought he was great. Romance, she was thinking, but I wasn't, mate. What a lovely Saturday night. So I thought, stretch me legs and give it a rest. Hello, Jim. You fancy a pint at best, you thirsty, mate? Feel like Bo Jest. Blimey, what an oasis. Courage best, should be right. Have his name read up in lights. Here, you better go. Well, we could have cried. Here, Beryl's nearly closing time. What a lovely Saturday night.
Remember a pint of best. Courage do.
Say, get in the groove, the 12-inch disco party. 16 great extended disco cuts in the groove on Telstar.
Graham Garden looks through family albums in A Sense of the Past, and that follows in a moment.
There's summer sales now on at Curry's, with great bargains like this Lec fridge freezer with £20 off. And from the Toshiba range, this 20-inch Teletext TV is now $399.95. What's more, you can't buy cheaper thanks to Curry's Price Promise. So come on in now for superb sale bargains at Curry's.
These are the 1983 Vauxhall Chevettes, performance proved in rally after rally, reliable and economical. So what do you get? A 1300 engine, a smart saloon with a real boot, reclining seats with cloth trim, plus a push-button radio, quartz clock. And what do you pay?
Mr. Churchman, they must be joking.
Nobody jokes about money, Harry.
The 1983 Vauxhall Chevette, a real car for your money. Vauxhall Opel, better by design.
Always and forever. Direct to you by mail, Teledisc presents a unique two-album set, Always and Forever.
Started with a key.
Always and Forever features over 80 minutes of timeless love songs. For just £6.99, this double album includes Dionne Warwick, The Stylistics, Hot Chocolate, Marvin Gaye, and many, many more. And it's not available in the shops. If you have an Access or any Visa card, just ring this number or make your cheque or postal order for £6.99, payable to Always and Forever, and send it to this address. Please state whether you require records or cassette, or simply pop into your nearest post office and order through Transcash at no extra charge. And remember, Always and Forever is not available in the shops.
I knew it'd rain. It always does when you have a picnic.
Well, look on the bright side. We've got the cucumber sandwiches and the coffee.
I do love Maxwell House.
It's a fresh, natural flavour. What?
Do you know what this reminds me of?
No, what?
Remember that wonderful day in the New Forest?
Yes. I've never been in the New Forest.
Fresh, natural. Maxwell House.
Nothing can save bonds, but you can save money. Pick up a bargain before time runs out.
Countdown to close down.
For an Elvis imitator and his frenzied syncopator are gatters on a plateau of good taste. There's a pride in every cake that lions bake. Even Brahms aboard a boat in a place that's quite remote leaves the feeling that there's not a crumb to waste. There's a pride in every cake that lions bake. And in hotels way out west, there's debate between the guests which particular Sunday tastes the best. We take a pride in every cake we bake.
Hello. What's up, Jill? Oh, Liz, look at this floor.
Try new Ajax Liquid.
Ajax Liquid for floors?
New Ajax Liquid, especially on floors. Look, a handy new bottle, and there's no dissolving because it's a liquid already. You just can't beat new Ajax Liquid on floors. And how about that for shine?
Brilliant.
Smells lovely and fresh.
New Ajax Liquid for brighter, fresher cleaning. In lemon, too.
Brilliant.
Okay, hold it. Here we go.
This is a piece of history. Admittedly a very small piece and a very young piece. It's only a few seconds old. But history is a continuous process. So given time, this photographic record could prove to be as valuable a historical source as records, registers, archive material, or history books. We're all familiar with then and now photographs. Most of us find these comparisons interesting. They represent a measure of progress, and they represent a measure of permanence, because many of these buildings are still here today. The Victorians were fond of photographing their buildings. And as the Victorian city builders were recording their achievements, so the ordinary man was able to record his own progress. In the early days of photography, and I'm talking about 1860 onwards, anyone wanting their likeness taken needed money and patience. And Brian's going to show us now what a sitter could expect in a Victorian portrait studio. What's that?
Well, this gadget is going to prevent your head from moving during the half a minute or so that the exposure will take. So we'll tighten these two little prongs so they touch the back of your neck. You keep sitting still so your head keeps in contact all the time. A bit of luck, you won't move for half a minute.
No, I can't keep smiling for half a minute.
Well, no, you'll have to look fairly solemn, I'm afraid, otherwise your face will crack. First, we have to check that the framing and the focusing's okay. Yep, fine. Put in a holder for the plate. Cover up the lens. The plate is uncovered inside the camera, and now the great moment. We make the exposure, and off we go. Of course, the Victorian studio was thoroughly equipped with a selection of backgrounds, perhaps 10 or 12 different backgrounds, castles, mountains, river scenes, and all sorts of props and paraphernalia to liven up the picture. Rustic fences, pretend rocks, bits of furniture. The whole thing to dress things up to give the impression of grandeur and magnificence for the photograph. I should think we've had enough time now, so cover the lens. The plate is covered and off to the darkroom to see what we've got.
So that's why our great-grandparents looked so serious. They weren't allowed to smile. And anyway, it's hard to smile with your head clamped uncomfortably in place. While the photographer could usually hide the top of the clamp behind the neck, the heavy metal base was another matter. But even as the portrait studios flourished, a revolution was taking place. In 1888, George Eastman patented the first Kodak box camera, and the family snapshot was born. Photography became so simple it was literally child's play. It became more and more common to find delightfully informal and innocent pictures like these. So, what with the formal studio portraits and now the family snaps, there soon weren't many households without a photograph collection. Here at Manchester Polytechnic is the Department of Manchester Studies, where the family photo collection is being given the recognition it deserves. One of the team is Audrey Linkman.
Manchester Studies is a team of local historians based here at the Polytechnic in Manchester. We're interested in the history of the area, but particularly in the history of working people in the area and the routines of everyday life. And this interest has considerably extended the range of our activities. So, for example, we found there were very few documents in libraries and record offices that told us about the routines of everyday life. So we assumed a responsibility for rescuing and preserving the primary sources of local history.
This is no haphazard collection. Detailed attention is paid to every picture. Each one is copied, identified, indexed and cross-referenced. Then all the information about the picture, gathered from interviewing the donor, is entered into the files. Since 1975, a collection of over 35,000 photographs has been assembled, every one receiving the same thorough scrutiny and helping to build a picture of the lives of ordinary people, their homes, their jobs, their pastimes and hobbies, weddings, holidays, clothes and shops, even their moods. All the work in the department is devoted to recording the life and times of the people of Manchester through their reminiscences and their own photographs.
I think there's a great interest at the moment in photography and the history of photography. As far as I know, this is the only collection which systematically collects family photographs and stores them in the way that we do here. Manchester Studies is open to our public. We hope that the people of Manchester will come in and use it. We also make copies to go in library collections throughout the area because, of course, more people are used to going in public libraries than they are into polytechnic buildings. The sort of people who would be interested in a collection like this would be social historians, local historians, anybody who's interested in the history of photography. We have people who want illustrations for books coming to us. And of course we have TV companies coming to us because if they're doing a period production and want to know, for example, what a school in Wigan looked like in the 1920s, and they want to know particularly that it's a school full of miners' children, then our archive can provide the answer.
By ensuring public access to the collection, the Manchester Studies Group keep in close contact with the people who are their main source of supply. Another method to attract the attention and interest of possible donors is to mount public exhibitions of the collection. These exhibitions are successful. People seem very willing to show Audrey and her team their collections, especially when they see that their photographs are considered to be important and will be cared for. The exhibitions always carry details of the group's work and examples of photographs and information contributed by members of the public in the area. Why do these exhibitions work?
I think those small local exhibitions, they're looking to see if they're on them, basically, because they do recognise the people and the places. In fact, that's one of their strengths. What we hope to do with them is to get people to go one step further and to see themselves as important in history and the documents that they produce as important raw materials for historians to write their history from. Well, ladies, good afternoon. What I'd like to talk to you about this afternoon is one aspect of the work of the Manchester Studies team. Now, the Manchester Studies team is based at the Polytechnic.
While the exhibitions provide much of the source material for the collection, the group has learned over the years that a direct appeal to the public will often generate as much response. Although the exhibitions have members of the group in attendance to talk to interested donors, Audrey and her colleagues spend just as much time out and about talking directly to groups of people in the area.
Well, no collection of family photographs, certainly any collection up to a 1950, is complete without its selection of studio portraits. Well, I've started with this little lad because I'm very fond of him. I've started with him just to show that it wasn't always a pleasant experience being taken to the studio. This is little Ernest Stones. He was the cousin of the donor. It's taken in about 1923, and he has this expression because apparently he'd just been, quote, belted with a shovel. So, obviously, to bring Ernie into line. This one is terribly typical of its kind. Yes, a studio portrait of a family. Look at the backdrop. It's the typical drawing room setting, wainscoting, suggestion of sort of French windows, drapery. And the table, and on the table a book, and on the table usually plants, and usually an aspidistra. And that was a high point of respectability to have an aspidistra in the photograph. The aim of our talk is, one, to share our collection with our local public, and two, to alert them again to the importance of this material as vital raw material of history. And trigger people to go home, to look at their own collections in a different light. Well, there's no men in this audience, but can anybody guess why this likely pair have trotted off to the studio? What significant... First long trousers, that's something. Somebody's got it there. First long trousers. That's it. First pair of long trousers. It shows Percy Davis on the left, aged 14, and his friend, Freddie Chandler. And the friends had the photograph taken in great excitement because they're wearing their first pair of long trousers. It was taken at Whitsuntide in 1927, and Percy at that time worked at Ashton Brothers in Hyde as an electrician. They tell me things I don't know. They have often lived through the things that we're talking about. They will fill me in. And it doesn't matter how often I've seen a slide, you show it for the 58th time and somebody has a new piece of information to give you. The girl at the bottom here, I think, is holding a kitten which has moved.
On slow days, the studio photographers would take their cameras into the streets. Instead of the straight-faced children in their Sunday best, we see these charming moments from everyday life. And if parents couldn't afford a snap, then they'd collect all the children from the street and share the cost.
What I would like to do now is to appeal to all of you to help us in our work of preserving the visual record of the past. Any of you who have family photographs and are prepared to cooperate in our work now, our normal practice is to take your name and address. Either myself or one of our field officers will come and visit you. We'll sit you down and we'll go through every photograph in your collection with you, asking who is it, when was it taken, where was it taken, why was it taken? Because your past and your history is important and we must try and preserve it now. Thank you.
After the appeal, a chance for Audrey to see what treasures from the past the audience has brought along to the talk.
Have you noticed all the photographs of that period never smiled, did
Were
they?
you actually told not to smile?
Well, I think that's how we were, you see, in that time.
Yeah.
As I've noticed with those that you took before, we're not smiling, any of them, were they? They didn't in those days.
That's a lovely photograph. Do you know any details?
Yes, I know exactly.
Yes?
It's the stable yard of a house called Hilltop.
Where was that?
Outside Huddersfield.
Yes.
It's my grandfather, and the horse is called Nasty.
What's your grandfather called?
John Nelson.
This him?
That's him.
Yes.
Running a concert party for charity.
In 1929?
Yes.
And we've got...
It's this rewarding detail, the combination of photograph and anecdote, that enables the group to make such well-documented and accurate records of life in the Northwest.
This is in Huddersfield?
Yes, outside Huddersfield.
I suppose you wouldn't know how he came to have these photographs taken.
I don't know that.
Did he retire in Sheffield?
He died.
And on this one, is this your sister or is this you again?
That's my sister, because I wasn't born then.
You're invited into somebody's home and you can talk to them about very intimate details of their lives, right from their earliest childhood memories through to the present time. Right. Do you know what date it was taken?
Yes,
Tell us when you were born, in fact.
1924.
1924.
Yes.
Well, we'd like to follow... You can get to know people on a very intimate level and have a relationship which I don't know how you could have in any other way.
Got my name and address and telephone number.
So we'll get in touch with you.
Yes.
But it might be some time because we're moving
I'll be all right.
Marjorie Robinson went to one of Audrey's lectures. The result was an entirely newfound interest in her own collection of family photographs. She also became a valuable donor.
This is me when I was small.
Classic.
Oh, yes, beautiful. My mother had two of these, one at each end of the mantelpiece. And when we were teenagers, we used to bring our boyfriends home, my mother would point these out and say, "That's Marjorie, that's Maureen." And a source of embarrassment.
Marjorie's enthusiasm was spurred by the interest shown by Manchester Studies. Here, her grandfather. He was killed in a pit disaster. And here, a charming child study, a whole family tree pieced together from her collection. The happy rubbing shoulders with the sad. This is a mourning photograph, produced to remind distant members of the family what the deceased looked like. And other photos carry their own piquant stories.
Now, this was my mother's uncle, her father's brother, and his wife, Jane. Now, Jane was a medium. She was a very interesting woman. And one of the most interesting stories about her is that shortly before my grandfather's death, she came to my grandmother and said to her, one of us is going to lose a husband. There's going to be an accident, and one of us will lose a husband as a result of it. And shortly afterwards, there was the pit accident, and my grandfather died. She used to stop people in the street and tell them things quite out of the blue. My mother says that when she was small, she used to come to her grandmother's, and my mother would be shut out of the room, and they'd have little seances. Didn't know anything about it.
How do you find out, especially with old photographs, who the people are?
Yes, well, you ask the older members of the family first and see what they can tell you, what information they can tell you. And sometimes you'll find newspaper reports of various things that have been interesting. But the most important thing to do is ask the older members of the family first. Now, this is my grandmother and her sister Ethel. There's an interesting story attached to this photograph. You notice Ethel's wearing a high-neck blouse. When she was about 16, there was some trouble at home one evening, and her father had been drinking. Ethel was rather cheeky to him, and he thought she was impudent, picked up a knife from the table and threw it at her, and it stuck in the back of her neck and made a wound about 1.5 inches long and 1/2 inch deep. The policeman was called, and eventually he was taken to the local magistrate's court. And from there, he was sent to Knutsford to the quarter sessions to be tried. Ethel's blouse was produced as evidence. The bloodstained blouse was held up in court, and he was eventually given 2 months hard labour for this. Since then, ever since this accident, Ethel wore a blouse with a high neck to hide the scar. And this one shows 4 generations of the Robinson family.
Well, obviously you're very fond of your collection of photographs. And,
yes.
I expect you'll go on trying to expand the collection and hand it down to your daughter.
Yes, certainly, and I think everybody that has photographs should keep them and not throw them away. They are interesting.
With some searching, we could all probably tell the same sort of tales. But it's not only still photographs that the Manchester Studies Group pursue. They also collect the moving equivalent of the stills collection. Mary Ann Gomez coordinates the study of local films for the Northwest Film Archive. Amateur cinefilms are much rarer than still photographs, of course, but they do turn up, sometimes from a surprisingly rich source.
I'll show you from the collection of the Film Archive. This first one was made in 1909. And it shows a children's outing from Altrincham to Moberley in Cheshire. There were children who went to the Central Hall Picture Theatre in Altrincham, which had been a billiards hall, and they attended matinees regularly on a Saturday afternoon, had an attendance card stamped, and as a special treat, they had the right number of rubber stamps, were allowed to go on this free outing, which took a whole day. It started at 10 in the morning and lasted about 8 o'clock in the evening. Over 1,000 children went on the outing, and they were supervised by 8 adults, one of which was the manager from the cinema. You'll notice that the children have got labels. We found some of these labels. They had "Come Clean" stamped on them, and the children's name. This is at Altrincham Station, and I think what you have to remember is that for a lot of these children, it might have been their only opportunity of a holiday, of a day out.
Do we know who took the pictures?
We don't know the name of the person, but we know that the manager from the cinema, Thomas Hook, managed to get a cameraman down to film the events of the day, and the idea was then to show it back in the picture hall to the children and to their parents. We, in fact, found it in Altrincham Library, where it was sitting in a glass case as an example of early nitrate film. We're very lucky. We know quite a lot about this film because I took this out to a film show in Altrincham about a year ago, and a gentleman stood up in the audience who remembered going on this trip when he was 8 years old. So he's told us who was selling the ice cream and who brought the donkeys up. These weren't local children. We don't know who they were, but we think they were sort of professional acrobats who were employed on the day to entertain the children.
Very well-behaved audience.
Well, I think there was great excitement at the presence of a camera on the trip, which sort of added to the excitement of being involved on the day's picnic. And it's a particularly useful piece of film for the archive because it gives us an idea of the range of activities. And also nice because it was actually made for a cinema, and it testifies to the fact that children went very regularly, as early as 1909, to the cinema to follow their sort of Saturday matinee programme.
Also quite a shrewd bit of marketing, isn't
Yes,
it, by the manager?
very much
The
so.
children had gone to spend their money every week, and then they were lured back to bring their parents, who presumably had to pay to get in to see them.
And in 1937, they got this out as a bit of archive film and showed it with new titles. This is how your parents enjoyed the day.
Well, obviously these films are just a small part of the collection here. How many films do you have altogether?
Oh, we've got about 400,000 feet of film. We've got about 400 titles actually absorbed into the collection at the moment, but an awful lot, perhaps as many as that number again, awaiting acquisition still.
Obviously it's all very charming and interesting to look at, but what value are these films to the social historian?
I think that these films show us what it was like to live, work, take your leisure, take part in celebrations in the Northwest region. They show us the range of employment which people were involved in. They show us the things which were of interest to them, what they would have done if they'd gone on the Blackpool holiday, how they reacted to the day the King and Queen descended, how they celebrated Armistice Day.
It also shows how absolutely red-hot at business the early cinema managers were.
Very much so.